Ken, I actually got a good comment that I'll use to cue this up. And I know it's unrealistic because, everything was so set in stone in our league for so many years. But Justin in our comments goes, make the Mets fly to Pittsburgh for the makeup game. It doesn't matter for them. And who cares? You're finishing out a game like this. I actually think that's a good idea. Obviously, it wouldn't happen because everything has to be so officially done at Citi Field and make the Marlins go through hell. But your thoughts on last night?
Last night was terrible. And I saw a comment on Twitter saying that the umpires kind of blew it because they should have played through. 4 outs to go, just get it done. And last night would have been much more acceptable, I would say, if 2 nights before had not happened. And what happened 2 nights before was the real sin here, when that game was postponed because the Mets did not cover the field on Saturday. We went through that. The Marlins' frustration here is understandable. They are already fighting long odds. They're without Sandy Alcantara. They're without Yuri Perez. They have one of the worst 5 offenses in the major leagues, and yet here they are, competing for a playoff berth, and good for them. So to have these obstacles placed in their way on top of everything else, you do have to have some sympathy for them. And I know Steve Cohen apologized for the previous incident. There's no need to apologize for last night, but at the same time, you can see why the Marlins were frustrated. You can see why, ultimately, if this comes down to Monday, they're going to be really in a bad place in their heads.
Let me ask you this, Ken. We were talking about this earlier, where Scotty brought this up earlier about NL Manager of the Year. Do you think Skip Schumacher, whether he makes the playoffs or not, will be that NL Manager, or does he have to make the playoffs for him to secure this?
I don't know, Todd. It's a good question, and he certainly is a leading candidate. And usually with these awards, and I know I always refer to the story that I experienced earlier in my career. John Mozeliak, president of baseball operations for the Cardinals, said, Manager of the Year, that's what you guys, the writers, that's us guys, determine at the start of the season which team has the longest odds of making the postseason, and then the team that defies the odds, the team that does something that you guys didn't think was possible, that gets the Manager of the Year. And there's some truth to what he's saying there, that we set the expectations as writers, and then we vote on the people who defy all of our great logic. So by that standard, Skip Schumacher should be Manager of the Year, yes. But I would say Craig Counsell deserves a lot of support. And you know what, too? Dave Roberts doesn't get much respect in these kinds of awards often because his teams are so talented. But given what he has had to navigate this year with his pitching staff, he too deserves mention. And how can you not talk about Brian Stitker and the job he's done with the Braves? So, Todd, there are a lot of really good candidates this year. But if the Marlins get in, yes, I would say Skip Schumacher should be the front runner.
Nice.
There's a Counsell.
Dude, the Marlins.
Counsell's great too.
Yeah, Counsell's great. The Marlins offense is not good. Now pitching, man, they're going through a lot. Bless you for whoever that was. All right, so Ken was covering the awesome Mariners Rangers game last night. I was hooked. I watched that one just about from start to finish, and JP Crawford saves the day. They almost got screwed at the end, or really to themselves. 9th inning, Chapman doesn't have it. Bases loaded, then 2 quick outs, and you're like, are the Mariners about to blow their season right here? JP saves the day. And before we get your thoughts, I just thought, his finishing line to the world was just perfect for some Friday motivation.
It was, Scott, but I prefer.
Hold up.
Let's fucking go!
Celebration taking over here. Emotions taking over here.
JP's like, hold up, Ken. I got something for you. And then actually on the Mariners broadcast, it went right to their post-game show, and they're like, we have to apologize. JP had a moment. I'm like, what did you talk to JP? I don't think he cares at all. He just showed his emotion.
Well, you have the FCC, Scott. You know about that. They're not covering foul territory necessarily. But that was a great moment. And it was kind of an interesting game. Well, it was a very interesting game. But in the way it turned out also, you have the Rangers bullpen, which has been their season-long issue. You have the Mariners with runners in scoring position. They were 0 for 8 when Crawford came to bat. That has been their issue in September. They're about 210 with runners in scoring position in September, batting average. So it was like the movable object and the resistible force. There's JP getting doused. And he is a guy that Scott Servais says is their MVP. And think about that. He's saying that knowing Julio Rodriguez is their superstar, but it's Crawford's leadership. It's his work ethic, all of the things that he brings that led Scott Service as their manager to say that. And his performance with the bases loaded this season, JP Crawford's, is incredible. He is 10 for 15 now with the bases loaded, 22 RBIs. Rodriguez said after the game, I knew he was going to do something. It's just what he does. And the Mariners, basically, if they had lost that game, they're 2 out with 3 to play. They're essentially done. Now things get a little bit interesting. They win tonight, okay, they're still going. And the Astros have to play in Arizona, with Arizona needing to win one more game to get in. So it's not over yet for the Mariners, and maybe they have some more magic in store in this next couple of games here against Texas.
You wrote about JP going to driveline, which I think a lot of guys, people don't know that it is for hitting too. Everybody thinks, oh, it's just a bunch of pitchers throwing the ball as hard as they can against the wall. But do you feel like him going to driveline helped him go 10 for 15 with runners in scoring position, or the fact that he has a contract security playing on this year and he can play in those situations for the organization?
Actually, Eric, I don't know that either one of those things can be credited for going 10 for 15 with the bases loaded. The analysts would tell you there's some luck there, and I'm sure there is. But you guys know this, and I get tired of the statistical people telling me otherwise, and all of us otherwise. There is something to having a slow heartbeat when the pressure is greatest. There's no question about it. We see certain players who can rise to that occasion. And yes, there is some luck always involved in baseball. We get that. But there are certain guys who are RBI guys, who are clutch players. JP Crawford has become that. And I don't know that going to driveline necessarily translates into his bases loaded performance, but it translates into his offensive performance, which is so much better this year than it's ever been. He's had a breakthrough. His OPS is 815. Entering the season, it was 691 for his career. It's a different hitter. He's a guy who's moved from the 9th spot to the top of the order, and he has become really the heart and soul of this team. And it's cool to see. If you remember, the Phillies traded him to the Mariners. I don't know that the Phillies believed JP Crawford could be an everyday major league solid contributor. Well, he's every bit that for Seattle.
One more layer to the Mariners drama at the end of the season here is Hector Neris versus Julio Rodriguez, the friendship gone bad. And you were there, so what did you get from everything? I mean, some people are saying, like, Julio's never going to talk to him, or it sounds like he's pretty pissed off about something that went on the field.
Scott, you're absolutely right. He is very upset, and that is what I took out of that news conference he had yesterday in the dugout, talking to a lot of reporters. And I asked one question, and it was toward the end, and I asked, will you ever talk to him again? And he kind of didn't give an answer in the affirmative. So he felt that while celebrations are fine, he celebrates himself at times. He thought you do it with your team, you do it yourself. Neris came at him, and that was the issue here. Now, he wouldn't talk about what Neris said. He wouldn't mention whether the comment that Eugenio Suarez said was a homophobic slur was actually uttered. But clearly, he learned that he can't necessarily go into a game now thinking, well, that guy's my friend, we're cool. Because when you're on the field, you guys know this. You can be friends off the field, but when you're on the field, it's competition. It's an entirely different scenario. And if there was a lesson Julio Rodriguez said, it's that. He has to take a different look now at the people he trusts and kind of just reconsider everything. That's what he said.
Now let's go over to the East. Baltimore Orioles, man, if you would have told me they're going to win the AL East at the beginning of the year, I would call you crazy. But this team has come together. They're rookies that come up. I mean, they just fit right in just like a puzzle. Talk about the Orioles a little bit, and what do you think their odds are moving forward?
Todd, what amazes me about the Orioles really more than anything is their resiliency. And they haven't lost a series, right? That's the record that they have, or this streak that they have of just not losing several games in a row. It's incredible because they seem to find ways to win games. You look at their roster, even now, as talented as it is, you look at their pitching staff, as good as it has performed, as well as it has performed, and you don't necessarily see a championship team, but they win. And that is the story of the Orioles season. It is the reason why they have the best record in the American League, why they are the American League East champions. I don't know how they're going to fare in the postseason. I think we talked about this yesterday. I see it as wide open. I think every American League contender has its flaws. And the Orioles, without Bautista, it's not the same bullpen. But Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez have been two of the best starters in baseball in the second half. Their offense is resourceful. They get enough. Henderson is a star. Rushman is a star. So I don't rule anything out with them. And they're probably going to get Tampa Bay or Toronto in the first series. That's not going to be an easy series for them. But I can see them running it all the way. Really, I can. At least to the World Series.
Did you know before it was written last night that the Orioles won the exact same number of division titles in the last 9 years as the Yankees?
I did not know that. And if you think about it, okay, it makes sense because they had a good run under Showalter for a few years there. But it's quite a statement in general. And when you look at the AL East, and to think that the Orioles and Rays, for the first time, are finishing 1-2. It's never happened before. And the Yankees and Red Sox are out of the playoffs. The Astros look like they're going to make it, but they could be out too. It's a changing of the guard to some degree in the American League. Obviously, Tampa Bay has been there, but we see Minnesota now emerging as a team that I believe is going to end their 18-game postseason losing streak. We see Texas coming on. We see Seattle for a second straight year being in contention. It's quite interesting to see how this league is evolving. And in time, if the White Sox ever wake up, if the Tigers get it going, you're going to see some other things as well.
Ken, last night was bittersweet for me when I'm watching the Orioles situation because they're young, they're exciting, they're fun. I love Camden Yards. I think that fan base, has suffered through a lot, and that's the problem. Do you think that owners are going to look at, I believe it's the last place payroll for the Orioles, and what was it, 6 years of tanking, and say, well, I can do that. It's a copycat league, and that goes for owners too, right? Every owner wants the Battery in Atlanta, and we're seeing that kind of pop up, including in St. Petersburg, in the state I'm in right now. Are clubs going to look, owners, especially mid-market, lower market, and say, let's do that again? That was cool. That was trendy with the Astros and the Cubs and some of those teams. Then it felt a little bit out of favor, and they're like, look at the Orioles. They're the talk of the town. They're going to make a ton of money. I think it's bad for baseball.
I don't disagree, Scott, and I haven't disagreed on that point ever. Obviously, the tanking situations that occurred were not healthy for the game. Now, keep in mind, the CBA, the new one, has some built-in safeguards against what the Orioles did. There is a draft lottery now, so you can't simply dive to the bottom and get the number one pick. You still will be in the top 5, 7, whatever it's going to be, but you can't have that same assurance. So teams have taken this course. They will continue to take this course unless stronger measures are enforced. Maybe they can't do it to the same extent, but that's the way the game has been for a while now. And it was a huge problem, a huge point of contention in the last CBA negotiations. They got to where they did. They did some things that will help, the lottery being foremost among them. But at the same time, could they do more? I have felt that they could do more, yes.
Okay, let me talk about two pretty much legends, Adam Wainwright and Miguel Cabrera. These two guys are in their final weekend of playing baseball. It's crazy. Where do you start, where you go in the middle, and how you finish. Waino gets 200 wins. I think, to me, it solidifies a Hall of Famer. And then Miggy, as we know, is going to be a first ballot, man. Talk about these two and how they impacted baseball.
Adam Wainwright, of course, his career began with his famous strikeout of Carlos Beltran, 2006 NLCS, the signature curveball. We saw it then, and then he had a great career as a starter, of course. To get to 200, I know it meant a lot to him. It meant a lot to people in the sport who have a lot of respect for Adam Wainwright. He hasn't had the best year. If you look at his numbers, they're kind of ugly. I think the league has hit against him essentially the same as Freddie Freeman has hit for the season. So all that said, he did get to 200. He got there with a brilliant performance against the contending team, the Milwaukee Brewers. And I don't know about Hall of Fame, Todd, but he's certainly going to get consideration. And 200 wins, I'm not going to say it's the new 300 because we're not quite there yet. Maybe 250 is the new 300. But he had a great career. And beyond that, he was someone off the field who set an example for other players. A Roberto Clemente Award winner, a guy who's done some amazing things with charity, just an outstanding example for everyone. Miggy Cabrera, I remember in the early 2000s going to the apartment of his late agent, Tom Rich, in Aventura, Florida, outside Miami. I don't know why I was there. Tom just invited me over. We were going to talk about something. And this kid was there. I believe he was 18, 19 years old, maybe at that point, baby faced, and it was Miggy. And I've never forgotten that. And he grew into this amazing player. Of course, the 2003 World Series, he comes up with the Marlins, changes positions, has an amazing performance as a teenager. 2013, I believe that was the year he won the MVP over Trout. I don't know that he would have won it today, given what we look at with statistics, but it was an amazing year. And he has had an exemplary major league career. He is one of the best right-handed hitters, if not the best right-handed hitter of our generation. I would put Manny up there with him, but Manny has the taint. And even this year, he deserves a lot of credit for kind of accepting a secondary role, not giving his manager, A.J. Hinch, any problems with that. He was happy to be playing, happy to be enjoying his final season, and what a career he has had. The numbers just speak for themselves, and he will be a close to unanimous selection, I would think, for the Hall of Fame.
That was going to be my question. Is he going to be unanimous? Because I agree with you. I think Waino might be, he's just close. He's close. He's a Hall of Fame person. But is it unanimous? And what does that mean to the player? But also, what does that mean to the writers who write in their ballots? Like, I want to make sure he's not, so I'm going to make sure I leave one off. Everybody else will vote him in.
I don't know that he will be unanimous. There's only been one, right? Mariano Rivera was the only unanimous selection to the Hall of Fame. There might be some people who look at Miggy's alcohol issues and some other things that have gone on and say, I'm not putting him on first ballot. I don't vote like that. Some people do. It's a free country. It's a free ballot. You're allowed to vote for whoever you want. And I always think, Eric, not to diminish your question, but the first ballot thing, that means something. That's a special category of Hall of Famer. Unanimous, all it takes is one voter, one cranky person to say, I'm not voting for that guy. And does it really matter? I don't know that it matters. It was cool that Rivera got it, no question. But to me, when you're first ballot, that's what matters. That is the true indication of a special elite player. And obviously all Hall of Famers are, but it's the inner circle when you're a first ballot Hall of Famer.
And Ken, lastly, I'll just throw a little over-under at you because we're not going to get into all the manager talk like we did yesterday. We'll have plenty of time for that. Over-under over the next week, 1.5 manager announcements. I would say firings, but you know how some teams will carefully craft their wording. 1.5, though. I feel like that could be a tough number over the next week based on what I've read from your article a couple days ago. What do you think?
Well, first of all, Scott, I have to ask, is Terry Francona included in this? Because he is
No.
stepping down. All right, no. So you're asking 1.5 firing.
Yeah, like, if the Astros miss out on the playoffs, Dusty, which you wrote about,
Yes.
Buck situation, Boone and Melvin.
I don't know in the next week, 1.5, but I would say over the next month, yes, 1.5. And you know
Over.
what, guys?
He said
Over. Yes.
Okay.
And I say that because even though I wrote that a lot of these situations are kind of fluid and you don't really know what's going to happen, it always seems like stuff does happen. And stuff comes out of nowhere, too. The Mike Schilt firing a couple of years ago, no one expected that. And I'm not saying there's something brewing somewhere that we should look out for as a big surprise. If I knew that, it wouldn't be such a surprise. We'd write about it. But it seems to me that there is enough in play here where you could see some managerial changes. And that's what you're asking.
Yes.
1.5 managerial changes, yes, over on that.
Okay, perfect. Ken, have an awesome final regular season weekend, and we'll see you next week, including a Fresh Fair Territory playoff edition.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, guys.